Story 1. I never used to think about the mirror in that apartment. We had this narrow hallway in that San Antonio complex, carpet old enough to be stained dark in patches, the air always smelling like the neighbor's cooking mixed with the pool chemicals that drifted in when you cracked the window. I was 10, coming home after school with my backpack banging against my lower back, the key dangling on a string around my neck. I don't even remember what I was thinking about when I turned the lock and stepped in that day. It was quiet, which wasn't weird. Mom was working late at the hotel, and Dad wasn't around much, so most afternoons I'd have the place to myself until it got dark. I remember the hum of the fridge and the cheap clock ticking on the wall. I dropped my backpack near the couch, didn't even bother with a snack, and I turned down the hall to go to my room. That's when I saw it. There was this cheap mirror hanging at the end of the hall, the kind with the thin gold frame that's too light for its size. It was just there, reflecting the doorway into the kitchen behind me. And in it, there was a man. I don't know how else to say it. There was a man standing in our kitchen, just behind me. But when I turned around, there was nobody there. In the mirror, though, he was clear as day, like a bad old photo that still somehow catches every detail. An older guy, pale, standing very still, wearing a black tuxedo, like he'd stepped out of a funeral or a wedding. I couldn't see his face clearly, but his head was slightly tilted, like he was trying to see me better. I couldn't breathe. My legs were shaking so hard that I had to grab the wall to keep from falling. I stared into that mirror, trying to make sense of it, but he didn't move, didn't blur, didn't fade out like a shadow. He was just there, standing in my kitchen. I backed up until I hit the side table by the couch, knocking over a bowl that clattered to the carpet. I kept glancing back, but the kitchen behind me was empty, dead quiet except for the fridge humming, like it always did. But in the mirror, he was still there, standing like he was waiting for me to say something. My mouth went dry, and I remember whispering, "Who are you?" before I even realized I'd said it. He didn't answer, didn't move, didn't blink. I ran to my room, slamming the door and jamming my little bat between the handle and the floor, like I'd seen in movies, even though it wouldn't have stopped anybody. I just stood there, breathing so hard it hurt, trying to listen. Nothing moved, no footsteps, no doors, nothing. I don't know how long I stood there, but it felt like forever, each second dragging on, my mind trying to figure out if I should call someone, if I should open the door. I kept thinking. I locked the door when I came in. Nobody opened it, I would have heard it, but he was there. After a while, I couldn't take it anymore. I slowly opened the door, holding the bat with both hands, and I stepped out. The apartment was so quiet, the kind of quiet that buzzes in your ears. I forced myself to walk back down that hallway, staring at that mirror. He was gone. I stood there shaking, looking at the empty kitchen reflected in the glass. I checked every room, every closet, even under the beds. Nothing. The door was still locked. The windows were still locked. Nobody was there, but I saw him. I know what I saw. That night I slept with my lamp on, the bat still in my hand under the blanket, eyes wide open, listening to every creak of the building, every drip from the faucet, every whisper of wind against the window. I didn't tell Mom when she got home because I didn't even know how to say it. I was scared she'd think I was lying, or worse, that she'd believe me and we'd have to move again. I couldn't go near that mirror for weeks. I'd take the long way around the hall, or I'd run past it, looking at the ground so I wouldn't see him again. Eventually, Mom noticed, asked why I was acting weird, and I just told her I didn't like the mirror because it felt creepy. She laughed and said it was just a cheap mirror and that I was letting my imagination get to me. I never saw him again, but that doesn't help, because once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. You start wondering if mirrors are just showing what's in front of them, or if they're showing something else sometimes, something you're not supposed to see. And when you're alone, even in the middle of the day, you keep thinking you'll catch something out of the corner of your eye. Story 2. I was 15 when it happened. We had moved to a small rental house in East Lansing, Michigan, not far from my dad's work at the tire shop. The street was quiet, lined with maples and cracked sidewalks, the kind of neighborhood where you could hear sprinklers at night. The house itself was nothing special. 2 bedrooms, old wood paneling, creaky floors that moaned when you walked. I shared a room with my little brother, and our parents' room was across the hall. My parents worked late, so I spent a lot of evenings alone doing homework or messing around with the radio. I didn't believe in ghosts, not really. I mean, who does at 15? That night it was raining hard, and the gutters outside my window dripped steady like a metronome. I was trying to finish a biology worksheet, lying on my stomach on the floor, highlighter in my mouth. My brother was at a sleepover, and my parents had just left for a late shift at the diner. It was just me, and I liked it that way. I could watch TV without them telling me to turn it down. I don't know what made me notice it, but the closet door was open, just a crack. It was always shut, but I must have left it open when grabbing a sweatshirt earlier. It was dark in there, blacker than the room, like the darkness in there was thicker somehow. I remember thinking it was weird how the crack seemed to look back at me. I ignored it, turned on the TV, and let the noise fill the silence. Around 11:30, the power flickered and the lights went out. The room went dead quiet, except for the rain hammering the windows. I lay there waiting for the lights to come back, but they didn't. I didn't like the dark, but I wasn't about to admit that to anyone, so I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. That's when I heard it. Someone whispered my name. I froze, the kind of freeze where your whole body turns to stone and your ears ring. I thought it was the rain at first, or maybe the house settling, but it came again, closer, right by my ear. Ryan! I jumped to my feet, the flashlight shaking in my hand. My heart was pounding so loud it was all I could hear, like it was trying to drown out whatever else was in the room. I spun around with the light, checking the corners, the bed, the hallway. Nothing. And then I realized it had come from the closet. I don't know why I went to check. Maybe it's that stupid instinct people have when they hear a noise in the movies and go, look, even when you know they shouldn't. I stood in front of the closet door, hands shaking, breathing so hard it fogged the screen of my phone. The crack was wide enough to see inside, but it was pitch black, like a hole. I said, "Who's there?" My voice sounded small, fake, like it wasn't really mine. I waited. The rain kept pounding, and somewhere far away, thunder rolled. I almost turned away. I almost convinced myself it was nothing. But then I heard it again, softer, closer. "I'm in here." It was a man's voice, but it sounded wrong, like it was trying to sound like a man, but something was off, like it was too flat, or like it didn't know how to shape the words right. It was right on the other side of the closet door. I couldn't move. I was stuck, staring at that crack, waiting to see something move inside. My flashlight flickered, and for a second, I thought I saw a shape, tall and thin, with its head tilted like it was trying to see me through the crack. It didn't have eyes, or maybe it did, but I couldn't see them, only the impression of something leaning closer, just inches away. I stumbled back, hit the wall, and dropped my phone. The lights spun around the room, landing back on the closet. The door creaked, just a little, as if pushed from the inside. And then slowly it began to open. I don't remember screaming, but my throat hurt afterward, so I must have. I grabbed my phone and ran, not even looking back. I didn't stop until I was outside in the rain, barefoot, standing in the driveway, the cold water soaking through my clothes while I gasped for air. I watched the house from the driveway, waiting for something to look out the window. The closet window was dark, but I felt it looking back at me. I could feel it in my bones, like a pressure pushing down on my chest. The street was empty, just rain and the hum of streetlights. I called my mom, begging her to come home. I didn't go back inside until they arrived, and even then, I wouldn't go back into that room. My dad checked the closet, said there was nothing in there, told me I must have had a nightmare. But I know what I heard, I know what I saw. We moved out a month later, but not because of what happened. At least that's what they said. Dad said the rent was too high, and Mom said she wanted to be closer to her sister. But I think they knew, even if they didn't say it out loud. There was something wrong with that house. I don't talk about it much anymore, but I haven't slept with a closet door open since that night. I can't. I still think about that voice, how it said my name, like it knew me, how it said it was in there, waiting. Story 3. I've lived in Marysville, Washington, most of my life, and if you've ever driven up here, you know it's all gray skies and pine trees that crowd the roads, making you feel like the forest is waiting to swallow your car whole. I work construction during the week, and most weekends I'm just too tired to do anything. But last summer, my buddy Chris invited me to camp out at his family's property for his birthday. He promised beer, a fire pit, and a spot away from town where we could let loose for a night. It was the usual: cheap whiskey, a busted Bluetooth speaker, people laughing too loud under the stars. Chris's family's property has this massive leaning metal shop that's rusted out along the roofline, half dirt floor inside and stuffed with old tractor parts, moldy furniture, and random boxes. People joked about it being haunted, but nobody really took it seriously. That night, it was me, Chris, Mark, and a few others, all half drunk, passing around cheap beer. One by one, they tapped out and stumbled to their tents, but I wasn't tired yet, so I kept the fire going alone, messing around on my phone and letting the embers keep me company. I only got up because I had to piss. I walked over to the side of the shop, keeping a little distance because it smelled like rust and oil even from outside. There was a dirty window, and the fluorescent light inside was buzzing. I remember thinking it was weird that it was on because Chris said they cut the power to the shop most of the time. I figured maybe someone turned it on earlier and forgot. While I stood there, I noticed something moving near the ceiling. It looked like a strip of paper or maybe a dollar bill, just drifting in the air, swinging in these slow, perfect figure eights. I thought it was a moth at first, but it was too smooth, like it was floating underwater. It moved like someone was dangling it on a string, but there was nothing there. I just stood there watching it, feeling this weird tightness in my chest. It suddenly drifted backward, into the corner where the light didn't reach, near this old wooden chair that had a ripped cushion and a dark stain on the seat. The thing just slipped into the dark, and I couldn't see it anymore. I don't know why, but I got the chills so bad that I zipped up and backed away, trying to laugh it off. I sat back down by the fire, cracked open another beer, and tried to focus on my phone. I played this dumb game, Robot Unicorn Attack 2, to distract myself. After a while, I saw Mark get up from his tent, scratch his belly, and take a piss by the trees before going back to bed. I stayed up another 15 minutes before deciding I was done too, and crawled into my sleeping bag. The next morning, we were making eggs and coffee on the propane stove. Everyone was hungover, hair sticking out at weird angles, laughing about the dumb stuff they said the night before. Mark was leaning against a tree holding a cup of coffee, and he looked at me. "How late were you up, dude?" he asked. "Pretty late," I said. "Maybe 2, 3? Why?" He looked at Chris, then back at me. "Who was up with you?" I stopped cracking the eggs and looked at him. "Nobody. I was the last one up." He frowned. "Nah, man, I got up to take a leak, and I saw you by the fire. You were on your phone, and there were 2 people behind you, like leaning over your shoulder." The hairs on my arms stood up. "What?" "Yeah, dude, I thought it was Chris and maybe Eddie, but they were standing too close. One was tall, skinny, like super tall, and the other was bigger, like broad, standing right behind you while you were on your phone." Everyone went quiet. Chris said, "Man, nobody was up. We were all passed out." Mark shook his head, rubbing his eyes like he was trying to see it again. "They were just standing there, not moving, like they were watching you." I thought it was weird they weren't saying anything, but I figured you guys were just too hammered. Nobody said anything for a minute. The only sound was the eggs sizzling. I felt sick, thinking about how I'd felt someone behind me, but shrugged it off as the wind or my own nerves. Later, I walked over to the shop in daylight, standing in the same spot where I'd seen that thing in the window. The inside was dark, the light was off, and there was no power hooked up to the building at all. Chris confirmed it, flipping the breaker box open to show the main switch was dead. We packed up that afternoon, and I didn't say much on the ride home. I kept thinking about Mark's face, the way he looked when he told me what he saw, like he was trying to convince himself he didn't see it either. I don't know what it was, but something was there, standing behind me while I sat alone by that fire, playing on my phone, thinking I was the only one awake in the world. I've camped out at that property again since then, but I don't stay up alone anymore. If the fire dies, it dies, and I go to bed when everyone else does. I don't piss by the shop, and I don't look in the windows, even in daylight. Story 4. I grew up around Portland, Oregon, and I've spent most of my life in the Pacific Northwest. It's the kind of place where the trees hold the fog so thick you can feel it on your skin, even if you're inside a tent. That's just normal around here. My name's Anthony, and this happened to me when I was 23. My friends Matt and Lucas wanted one last camping trip before the weather turned. We took Matt's beat-up Subaru and drove out to this primitive campground near Estacada, close to a river, deep enough in the woods that there's no reception, no lights, nothing but damp pine needles and your own breath hanging in the cold air when you exhale. It was already dark when we set up, and we ended up in this tiny 3-person tent, all jammed together like sardines. We didn't even bother with a fire that night. It was too damp, and we were tired, so we climbed in and turned off our headlamps. That's how I remember it, complete black, except for that kind of gray fog that floats in, making your breath feel colder than the air. I was lying there, head by the tent door. Matt's head was at the other end, and Lucas was next to me, snoring off and on, the kind of quiet snore that sounds more like a slow leak in a tire. And then I heard it. It was like someone talking but through water, or like a voice on a phone when you drop a call and it goes all muffled. Just this, "Hello? Can you hear me? Hello?" It was so clear that at first I thought Matt was screwing around with us, but I didn't say anything. It came again, right between us, like it was floating in the air above our sleeping bags. "Hello? Can you hear me?" I didn't want to open my eyes, but I did. It was still dark, nothing but the slight sag of the tent ceiling above. My heart started pounding so hard it made my ears feel plugged. Then Lucas whispered, "You hear that?" I said, "Yeah." We both sat up fast, and Matt's voice came from the other end of the tent. "What the hell was that?" The voice came again, closer, almost like it was under the floor of the tent. "Hello? Can you hear me?" It didn't sound like a person standing outside. It didn't even sound like it came from a phone anymore. It was like it was vibrating in the air between our heads, but there was no echo, no shape, nothing to see. Just that voice, polite, calm, like it was really expecting an answer. I started feeling around in my sleeping bag, thinking maybe my phone was still on, but it wasn't there. Lucas started digging through his stuff, whispering, "Where is it? Where is it?" Matt unzipped the bag at the other end, and cold air hit us, but there was no sound outside, no footsteps, no voices. "Dude, shut up for a second," Matt said. We went dead silent, listening. The fog outside pressed so hard against the tent that you could hear droplets of water falling off the branches, tiny little taps on the nylon. Then again, "Hello? Can you hear me?" Lucas started crying a little, not like bawling, but just these shaky, choked-up breaths. I felt like I couldn't swallow. I said, "It's coming from right here." I pointed to the middle of the tent floor, where the sleeping bags bunched up, but there was nothing there. Matt said, "It's outside, right?" But it wasn't. We all knew it wasn't. It was inside, like it was crawling around in the air. "Hello? Can you hear me?" This time it sounded like it was right against my ear, but I couldn't feel breath, just cold, like I'd opened a freezer door. I flinched away, slamming into Lucas, who was shaking so hard that the tent was moving. We scrambled for the zipper, all of us fumbling over each other. We tumbled out into the fog, barefoot in the pine needles, breathing like we'd run a mile. The night was so quiet that I could hear my heartbeat, and every time I inhaled, the cold air burned in my nose. Matt looked at me and said, "Dude, where's your phone?" I said, "In the car." We turned and looked at the Subaru parked about 20 feet away. Lucas was hugging himself, looking like he was about to throw up. I said, "I'll go get it," and started walking, crunching over the needles. I opened the car door. All three of our phones were in the cup holder, screens dark, dead silent. I picked mine up, checked it. No signal. Nothing. I checked the others. Nothing. Behind me from the direction of the tent, I heard it one more time, muffled, almost sad. "Hello? Can you hear me?" It didn't sound like a question anymore. It sounded disappointed, like it wasn't asking us, but someone else, like it realized we weren't who it was looking for. I turned around and saw Matt and Lucas standing in the fog, staring at the tent. It wasn't moving. There was no wind. It was like the whole forest had frozen to listen. We didn't go back into the tent that night. We ended up sitting in the car with the heater on low, headlights off, just waiting for the sky to lighten. None of us spoke. None of us even tried to explain it. It felt like if we talked about it, it would start again. The next morning, there was no sign that anything had happened. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing. We packed up in silence, drove out of the forest, and I remember looking back one last time as we hit the road, the fog just hanging there between the trees like it hadn't moved all night. I still don't know what we heard. I don't know if it was someone lost out there or if it was something else. All I know is it wasn't human. It wasn't outside. It was inside asking for someone, and it wanted us to answer. We never talked about it again. Story 5. I don't really like telling this story, but I guess it's the one that's never left me. I live in Boise, Idaho, and for years I worked security overnight at the old state prison they turned into a museum. I wasn't some ghost hunter. It was just a job that helped pay the bills while I finished school. But that place never let me leave it behind, even when I clocked out. The prison's old cell house was the worst. Everyone who worked there knew it. Sometimes when I had to lock it up at night, I'd get this feeling like someone was waiting just inside the doorway. Quiet, like they knew I had no choice but to come in. It was always cold in there, but it wasn't just that. It felt like the air pressed into your skin, like you were trespassing in someone else's space. This was about 6 years ago in February, when the nights get stupid cold and your breath hangs in front of you. I'd done my rounds, and the last thing on my checklist was turning off the lights in the cell house. The front office light was out, but the overheads in the block were still on, buzzing faintly. I don't know why I was dragging my feet that night. Maybe I was tired, maybe I was sick of being afraid of shadows, but I walked in anyway, keys jingling on my belt, flashlight tapping against my thigh. I walked down the row past cell 5, cell 6, trying not to look inside. You learn not to look because sometimes you'll see something you can't explain, and then you have to live with it. I reached the junction at the end where I needed to hit the switch, turned, and there he was. A man, right in front of me, not 5 feet away. He was wearing the old inmate uniform, grayish, rough looking. His head was shaved close, and there was this hollow look in his eyes, like he was looking through me. I could see the tendons in his neck, the way the collar sagged on his shoulder. For a split second, I thought it was a reenactor or a homeless guy who'd broken in. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. And then he vanished. Not like he walked away or faded slowly. He was just gone, the air popping slightly like a static crack in the silence. I stumbled backward, hitting the bars behind me, metal rattling so loud it felt like it was shaking the entire block. I could still see where he had been, like my brain was burned with the shape of him, the way his shoulders slumped, the way his eyes locked on mine before he disappeared. I don't know how long I stood there, breathing hard, feeling my pulse in my teeth. Then as I turned to leave, something grabbed the back of my shirt, right between my shoulder blades, and yanked me backwards so hard I thought I'd fall. "Get out," a voice said right in my ear. It wasn't loud, but it was low, rough and angry, like someone forcing it out through clenched teeth. I swung around, flashlight shaking in my hand, lighting up the empty walkway, the empty cells, the dust drifting in the beam. My knees were weak, and I was trying not to cry, but it felt like something was standing inches from my face, watching, breathing. I backed away, step by step, eyes on the spot where I felt it. "Okay, man, I'm leaving," I whispered, voice cracking. It followed me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it moving with me, step for step, like a heavy presence pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. I didn't dare turn my back again, so I walked backward all the way down the row, flashlight jerking with every step. When I reached the front door of the cell house, I fumbled with the keys, dropping them, hands shaking so hard they clanged against the concrete. I bent to pick them up, and I felt it lean close to the back of my neck, cold breath against my skin. I froze, terrified to straighten up. Then something, 2 fingers, touched the back of my neck, like a cold tap, and it was gone. I stood up, turned the key, and bolted outside, slamming the heavy door behind me, the clang echoing across the yard. I stood there gasping, looking up at the windows, expecting to see him looking back down at me. Nothing was there, but I knew it was watching. I didn't finish my shift. I sat in my car, lights off, engine cold, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to convince myself it hadn't happened, that maybe it was stress, exhaustion, the way old buildings creak and play tricks on your eyes. But the bruise that showed up between my shoulder blades the next day, right where I'd been grabbed, told me it wasn't in my head. I quit not long after that. People asked me if I ever saw a ghost there, expecting a fun story, expecting me to laugh and tell them it was nothing. I don't tell them everything. I just say, "Yeah, I saw something," and leave it at that. Story 6. I was living alone in a tiny upstairs room in the back of a beat-up duplex in Bakersfield when this happened. I was 23, trying to finish trade school, working overnights at a warehouse, and too broke to keep the place clean, so there were clothes and cups everywhere. I only mention that because every single thing was exactly where I left it that day, and that's what messed me up the most. I had come home sick. Not a sniffle kind of sick, but the type where your bones feel glassy and your head is hot and light at the same time. I took off my shoes, left them in the middle of the floor, and collapsed on my mattress, still in my hoodie, with a bottle of Gatorade next to me that I didn't even open. I don't know how long I was out, but when I came to, the sky outside was dark enough that the streetlight was bleeding through my cheap blinds, cutting a line of orange across the mess in my room. I couldn't move, like nothing. I've had sleep paralysis before, but this wasn't that buzz of panic. This was like someone had pinned me down with ropes, heavy ropes I couldn't even feel, but I could tell they were there. I tried to breathe deeper, to swallow, to twitch, but all I could do was move my eyes. That's when I noticed her, sitting on the metal railing at the foot of my bed. She wasn't moving, but she wasn't still either. Her hair was a black, matted mess hanging around her shoulders like seaweed, and her skin was wrong, grayish, patchy, like there was something growing on her, mold or something, and it smelled like wet laundry that's been sitting too long. I could see her eyes in the dark though, silver, and they didn't blink. They just glowed, steady, like the reflection of a cat's eyes, but sharper. She didn't say anything, didn't lean forward or raise a hand. She just watched me, and I watched her back because I couldn't look away. My eyes started to sting, but I couldn't close them. I remember a tear sliding down the side of my face, getting caught in my hair. She just sat there. I don't know how long, minutes, hours, I can't tell you. Time felt like it was gone. I thought I was going to pass out from panic, but I didn't. I was stuck, and she was just there, staring. And then, at some point, I realized her face was changing, or mine was. I couldn't tell which, but her nose, the shape of her mouth, the set of her eyes, slowly they were looking more like mine. She was still sitting there, but it was me. I was looking at myself looking back at me, but those silver eyes stayed the same, unblinking in my face. I couldn't scream. I wanted to, but it felt like my chest was nailed down. I tried so hard to force out a noise that my throat was raw, but nothing came out. And then it was like someone flipped a switch. She, or me, or whatever that was, wasn't sitting on the bed anymore. She was gone, and I felt this crushing weight on my chest, like a boulder dropped out of the ceiling, forcing the air out of me in one slow push until I thought I would pass out. I couldn't see her, but I could feel something there, heavy, pressing, and I could hear something too. Not a voice, but this deep, rattling breath right next to my ear, wet and harsh like someone gargling mud. My eyes flicked to the side, to the corner of the room where my closet was. The sliding door was stuck open like it always was, and my socks were still in the doorway, exactly where I left them, next to a crumpled fast food bag. But behind them in the darkness, something was moving. It ducked under the frame of the closet, but it was way too tall to fit. Its head was almost touching the ceiling, and I could see it even in the dark because its eyes were yellow, bright like traffic lights and shaped wrong, long and narrow, slanting down like a reptile's. It had wings, but not like a bat. These were red, bony, stretched out, and lined with spikes, like something between a gargoyle and a dragon. It didn't roar or hiss. It just stood there, looking at me, and its claws flexed slowly, scraping the inside of my closet walls. I couldn't look away. I couldn't close my eyes. It stepped forward, and every footstep was so heavy that I felt it in the floorboards under me, like a pulse through the room, but silent at the same time, like it was happening in the air instead of with sound. It was so close that I could see the scales on its neck and the way its claws curled and uncurled as it reached for me, slow, deliberate, like it had all the time in the world. And then I screamed. It was like everything unlocked at once, and the sound that came out didn't even sound like me. It was raw, torn from my chest, echoing in that tiny room. I bolted upright, gasping, sweating, coughing so hard I almost puked. The room was exactly the same. The socks, the fast food bag, the shoes, everything exactly where I left it. But the smell was still there, that wet, rotting smell for just a few seconds before it faded out, leaving the stale air of my room behind. I didn't sleep again that night. I couldn't. I sat there until the sun came up, staring at that closet, daring it to move. It never did. Days later, when I felt well enough, I told my dad about it while we were sitting outside the laundromat, waiting for the dryer. I wasn't expecting him to react, but he went pale. He looked at me and said, "Yellow eyes? Claws? Like a dragon?" I nodded, and he just stared at the ground. My mom came out with the basket and he told her, and she just whispered, "That's what you saw back then, right?" He didn't answer, but I could tell he had seen it too, years before, in a different room, in a different house, and it had tried to drag him underground. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was a fever dream or something else, but I know it felt real, too real. I can't explain it, and I don't think I ever want to see it again. I keep my closet door closed now. Story 7. I didn't grow up in some old creaking house on the edge of town or anything. Ours was a brick ranch with faded yellow siding, 2 blocks from the grocery store, right in the middle of nowhere, Ohio. I was 17 the night it happened, and I remember it clearer than my own graduation. That bust was always there by the front hall, this heavy bronze-looking head of a native man with a stern face and these deep eye sockets that caught the light weird. My dad bought it at a yard sale when I was maybe 8, said it was cool and classy. I never liked it. We kept it on top of this short bookshelf where the light from the street would hit it at night, giving it this cold gleam if you walked past. It sounds dumb, but I used to hold my breath when I walked by it to go to the bathroom at night. I didn't think about it much until the night I came home from seeing a late movie with some friends. It was around 11, and the neighborhood was dead quiet. I came in through the front door, locked it behind me, and turned around. And the street light outside threw just enough light through the curtain gaps for me to see the bust, clear as day. Except it wasn't right. It wasn't looking forward anymore. I know because it was facing me. I stood there by the door with my keys still in my hand, not moving, barely breathing. The hall felt like it got 10 degrees colder, and there was this tightness in my chest, like I'd stepped off a ledge in the dark and was waiting to hit the ground. At first I thought I was seeing things, like maybe my brother moved it to mess with me, but I knew he was out of state for the weekend and my parents were in their room asleep. It was just me in that hallway with this thing staring me down, its cold, dead eyes sunk deep in shadow, somehow darker than the darkness around them. And then it blinked. I swear to God it blinked. A slow, heavy blink, like the lids were sticky. And when it opened again, the eyes weren't bronze anymore. They were just eyes, black and wet, looking directly at me. I tried to back up, but my feet wouldn't move. My legs felt like they were filled with cement, and every breath I took came out shaky and thin. My keys slipped from my hand and hit the floor, but I couldn't look away. The mouth started to move. It didn't open like a person's mouth. The bronze cracked at the corners, like dry mud splitting apart, and I heard this low grinding sound, metal on metal, as the lips shifted. They didn't form words, but they moved, slow and deliberate, like it was trying to speak but couldn't or wouldn't or didn't need to. Because I felt it. That's the worst part. More than seeing it, I felt it pressing into me, something cold and hateful and old, like it wanted me to know it was there, and it was tired of being ignored. It felt like it was inside my head, pushing at the back of my skull. My eyes started to water, and I couldn't swallow, and I couldn't scream. I don't know how long I stood there. It might have been seconds or it might have been an hour. The only sound in the house was the ticking of the clock in the kitchen and the grinding of that cracked mouth moving, and my own heart slamming in my chest so hard I thought it would burst. Then the eyes shifted. They didn't roll or move like human eyes, but the darkness in them moved, a tiny shift, and I felt it, like it wasn't looking at me anymore, but looking through me, past me, into everything I was. It was like it was searching for something in me, pulling at something I didn't even know was there. That was when I finally broke. My legs gave out and I dropped to the floor, crawling backward, scraping my palms on the carpet until I hit the opposite wall. I kept my eyes on it the whole time, and it kept looking, that cold shifting blackness, the slow grinding of its cracked mouth. And then it stopped. It just stopped. The eyes were bronze again. The mouth was closed. The cracks were gone. It was just a statue, sitting on top of the shelf, facing forward. I stayed on the floor, shaking, until I could breathe again. My palms were bleeding, and my knees were raw from where I'd scrambled backward, but I didn't feel any of it. I don't know how long I sat there before I finally stood up, keeping as far from that shelf as I could, and ran to my room, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the lights on and sat on the floor with my back against the bed, staring at the door, waiting for the knob to turn or for the hallway to go dark. Every sound in the house made me flinch. I didn't care if it woke up my parents. I didn't care about anything except staying as far from that thing as I could. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was ever just a statue. I don't know if it was something that followed us home from wherever my dad bought it, or if it had always been waiting in there for someone to notice it. After my parents died and the house was sold, I never asked about it. I don't want to know where it ended up, or if someone else has it now, sitting quietly in their hallway, waiting for them to notice. All I know is, I've never felt anything that evil before, and I never want to feel it again. Story 8. I grew up in a small ranch-style house on the edge of town, out where the cracked sidewalk ended and the dirt started. It wasn't a creepy place, really. I had my GameCube, my bunk bed, and I could ride my bike to my friend Cody's house in under 3 minutes. I was 9, so the biggest thing I worried about back then was getting yelled at for leaving my shoes in the hallway. Cody was the kid with the older brother who had all the cool stuff. Posters of Metallica, airsoft guns, a PlayStation, and a shelf with weird junk from the flea market. That's where the Ouija board was. Cody found it under his brother's bed when he went off to college, and I remember him calling me after dinner saying, "Dude, come over. I found this thing. It talks to ghosts." I told him that was stupid, but he said, "Come on, let's just see if it works." His room smelled like Axe spray and dirty socks, and there was a window with a plastic blind that never closed all the way. We sat on the carpet, the board between us. The plastic planchette was light, felt like a toy. We tried to get it to move for like 20 minutes, and it didn't do anything. Cody kept laughing, saying, "Bro, this thing is trash." I didn't think about it again until a few days later, when he called me after school, saying he'd looked up how to do it for real. He told me we needed candles, to open a circle, and to take it seriously or it wouldn't work. I didn't believe in ghosts, but I didn't want him to think I was scared. His parents worked late, and it was just us there. He lined up a bunch of those cheap scented candles from the dollar store, cinnamon and vanilla, around the board. We sat down, the flames flickering against the posters, and Cody said, "Don't break the circle, no matter what." We put our fingers on the planchette and he asked, "Is anyone here?" It didn't move. We just sat there looking at each other, trying not to laugh. Then it twitched. Just a little, like someone nudged it. But I knew I hadn't moved, and Cody looked at me like, "Did you?" And I shook my head. Slowly it started gliding, a weird, scratchy sound against the board. It spelled out Y-E-S. Cody's eyes were wide, but he swallowed and asked, "Who are you?" "Owen." We just sat there. Owen, it sounded like a kid's name. Cody asked, "Are you a person?" It slid to no. I asked, "Then what are you?" The board was quiet for a second. Then it started moving again, faster than before, scraping against the board as it spelled out DEMON. My stomach dropped and I pulled my hand back, but Cody whispered, "Don't break the circle." I remember saying, "Prove it," because I didn't know what else to say, and it felt like the kind of thing you say in a movie when you don't believe. That's when we heard it. It came from the garage, which was connected to the kitchen by a hollow door with peeling paint. It was like this low, guttural howl, but it rose up, sharp and wet at the end, echoing in the empty garage. It didn't sound human, didn't sound like any animal I knew, but it was so loud that I felt it in my chest, and the candles flickered so hard they almost went out. I looked at Cody, and his mouth was open, and I could see tears in his eyes, but we didn't move, didn't even breathe. Then it happened again, even louder, like it was right on the other side of that thin door. We both stood up at the same time, the planchette skittering across the board, the candles tipped, hot wax dripping onto the carpet. Cody's hand was shaking as he reached for the doorknob to the garage, and I hissed, "Don't open it! Don't open it!" He opened it anyway. The garage was dark, the only light coming from the cracked window, a dusty shaft catching floating bits of dirt and old leaves. The smell of gasoline and lawn clippings hit us. The noise was gone, replaced by this thick, buzzing silence, like the room was waiting for something. We stood there staring into the dark, trying to see something, anything. There was nothing. No person, no animal, no movement. Just that heavy, sour air and the feeling like something was there, right in front of us, watching. Cody whispered, "It was just the wind, right?" But we both knew it wasn't the wind. We backed out of the garage, shut the door, and sat on the floor by the Ouija board. We didn't say anything for a while. The candles were burning down, some of them snuffed out, leaving streaks of wax on the carpet. My ears were ringing, and I realized I was still holding my breath. Cody finally whispered, We need to say goodbye, right? I didn't even answer. We put our fingers back on the planchette, and it was ice cold, like it had been in the freezer. We moved it to goodbye and took our hands off. Neither of us spoke after that. I left, walked home in the dark, looking back every few steps to see if something was following me. I didn't sleep that night, every creak of the house making me flinch. The next morning I had to pretend nothing happened, eat cereal, watch cartoons, try to be normal. But it wasn't normal after that. I never went into Cody's house again, even though he lived just down the street. We stopped hanging out as much, and when I saw him, we didn't talk about it. I don't think either of us wanted to. I still don't know what we heard that day, and I don't really want to. I don't believe in ghosts, or at least I tell myself I don't. But there's something about that sound, that feeling in the garage, that cold plastic planchette under my fingers. Story 9. I don't usually tell people this because it sounds like something out of one of those cheap ghost shows, but it happened, and I still think about it every time I hear footsteps at night. I was living in this old rental in western Pennsylvania, outside Butler, just off a narrow road that curved around a patch of woods nobody really went into. The house was a small 2-story sagging porch, pipes that banged in winter, windows that rattled when trucks went by. Nothing fancy. I'd moved in after my divorce because it was cheap, and my teenage son came on weekends. It was just me and my old lab mix, Buddy, most days. He was one of those dogs who wouldn't let you out of his sight, even to pee. I remember it was October, not Halloween or anything, just a cold, gray Saturday. I'd gone down to the basement to grab towels out of the dryer before my son got dropped off. Buddy followed me, nails ticking on the concrete floor, sniffing at the corners where the stone foundation bled dampness into the air. I had to bend down and yank the dryer door because it always stuck. I was tossing towels into the basket, not thinking about anything, just the warm smell of them hitting me in the face. That's when Buddy stopped moving. I heard his nails stop clicking. I turned my head and saw him standing with one paw lifted, ears up, looking at the far wall where the old coal chute was sealed shut with a rusted panel. The hair on his back stood up, and a low whine came out of him, the kind that made my stomach flip because dogs don't fake that. "Buddy?" I said. I remember saying it real low, almost whispering, because suddenly the air felt different, like the basement had gone quiet in a way it hadn't been before. He let out this yelp, like something had stepped on his tail, and bolted past me so fast he knocked the basket out of my hands. Towels spilled across the floor. I heard him scramble up the wooden steps, paws slipping, claws catching, and then he was gone, the sound of him hitting the kitchen floor above. I just stood there with my hands out, frozen. I was waiting for a noise, something to tell me what he'd seen. I don't know how long I stood there, but I started to feel like I was being watched, and it wasn't like when you think someone's behind you and turn to see nothing. It felt like something was right in front of me, staring, and I was too scared to look directly at it. I picked up a towel to have something in my hands. I remember I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, like the blood was moving too fast. Then there was this smell, like cold earth and wet rocks. The kind of smell you get if you dig too deep in the garden and hit something you wish you hadn't. I took a step backward, and that's when I heard it. It was breathing. It was so faint I thought it was my own breath at first, but it was off. A wet, ragged sound, like someone with water in their lungs trying to take in air but failing. It was right in front of me, just outside my arm's reach. I could feel the cold coming off it. I don't know how to explain that to anyone who hasn't felt it, but it was like opening a freezer and having the cold push out at you, except this felt alive. My knees went weak, and I dropped the towel. I turned and ran, grabbing the railing so hard I splintered it under my hand as I yanked myself up the steps 2 at a time. Buddy was at the top, whining, pushing against the door with his nose, trying to get away from the basement. I slammed the door and locked it, even though that made no sense. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely twist the lock. Buddy was glued to my leg, panting hard, eyes darting between me and the basement door. We stood there in the kitchen, just listening. I remember the hum of the fridge was so loud it made me jump when it kicked on, but I couldn't hear anything else. No footsteps, no breathing, nothing. That was it. It didn't drag on, didn't turn into a horror movie where things flew off the shelves or something, but Buddy never went down there again, no matter how hard I tried. He would plant himself at the top of the stairs and whine, backpedaling if I tried to pull him down. He would go everywhere with me, even into the bathroom, but if I opened that basement door, he would tuck his tail and leave the room. People say animals know things we don't, and I believe that. I moved out a year later when my lease was up, and I never went back. But sometimes when I'm folding towels, I remember the sound of that breathing in the basement and the way the air felt like it was pressing against me, like it wanted me to know it was there. I don't care if nobody believes me. I know what I heard, I know what Buddy saw, and I know I'm never going back into a dark basement without remembering that cold, wet breath on my skin. Story 10. I never thought working alone at night would mess with my head this bad. I've always been the type to take any shift I could get, and that's how I ended up pulling nights at a tiny AM radio station in New Mexico. It was a single-story house they'd gutted into a studio, maybe 3 rooms and a bathroom, plus a break room with a vending machine that ate your dollars for fun. People in town said the place was haunted, but I didn't grow up there, so I brushed it off. I just needed the paycheck, and it was quiet enough to spin classic rock without anyone calling in to complain if I messed up. They told me not to use the break room microwave too much, said it tripped the breakers sometimes. What they didn't tell me was about the basement under the break room. You wouldn't notice it unless you were looking for it. Just a thin wooden door with a tarnished brass handle by the soda machine, right next to a scuffed spot on the floor that looked like a rectangle someone tried to scrub out, but never could. I didn't know about the gravestone thing until a month in. One of the daytime DJs mentioned it while we were switching shifts. Said the last guy who owned the place carved headstones down there, died in the middle of working on one, and they just left it in the basement because it was too heavy to move. Apparently the new owners had it taken out years later, but that rectangle on the floor stayed. I thought it was bullshit, honestly. I used to keep the lights off in the front office to save on the electric bill, and also because it felt less creepy sitting in the booth if I didn't see the empty lobby behind the glass. One night, I stepped out of the booth to grab a Sprite from the machine. The second I stepped into the break room, something felt wrong. I don't know how else to explain it except my body knew before I did. My arms went cold, the hair on my neck lifted, and the room felt heavy like the air was thicker by that basement door. I tried to ignore it. I pressed the button on the machine, and the soda thudded down, but I jumped when it hit, which I'd never done before. I kept glancing at that door, waiting for it to move. It didn't. I told myself to stop being stupid, grabbed the Sprite, and walked back to the booth. But the feeling followed me. A couple songs later, I decided to do a sweep to shut the lights off, clear my head. I didn't even think about it, just wanted to walk it off. I went through the front offices, turned off the 2 lamps and the overhead lights, and the place dropped into darkness so fast it made me pause by the front window. I stood there for a second, looking out at the empty street, and I told myself again, "You're fine." I walked back toward the booth. As I passed the break room again, I felt it, like something standing too close behind you in line, breathing, but you can't hear it, only feel the weight of it. I didn't look at the door this time. I kept my eyes on the hallway, trying to pretend nothing was wrong. I got back into the booth, sat down, and put my headphones on. I tried to focus on the board, on the dials, the blinking lights, the song playing. I even said something dumb into the mic like, "Late night request lines are open, folks," even though no one called at that hour. After maybe 15 minutes, I needed to check the back door to make sure it was locked. I got up again and stepped into the hallway. That's when I saw it. Every single light in the front offices was on. The 2 lamps I'd switched off, the overheads, even the light in the tiny bathroom that I hadn't touched. The glow flooded into the hallway, and for a second, I just stood there, trying to work out if I'd made a mistake, if maybe the switches had flipped back up somehow. But I knew I'd turned them off. It wasn't just the lights being on. It was the feeling that someone was in there, standing behind the glow, waiting. My throat went dry, and I took a step back. I thought about calling someone, but who was I going to call at 2 a.m. to say the lights turned themselves back on? I don't know why I did it, but I walked forward, past the break room, past that basement door, every step feeling like it was pulling teeth. I stopped at the edge of the front office and looked in. Nothing. No shadows, no figures, just the lights on, humming quietly. The air so still it made my ears ring. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was standing right in the middle of that room, watching me. I whispered, "Stop," before I could think about it. My voice sounded small, like I wasn't supposed to be there. And then I heard it. From behind the break room door, the basement door, there was a sound. A dragging sound like something heavy sliding across concrete. Slow, deliberate. It only lasted a few seconds, but it was enough. I backed away fast, and the second I did, the dragging stopped. I don't remember much after that, except I shut myself in the booth, locked the door, and sat there with the lights on until sunrise, headphones around my neck. The on-air sign glowing while I watched the dark hallway through the glass. I didn't go back to check the lights. I didn't go near the break room again. When the morning DJ came in, I just grabbed my stuff and left without saying much, got in my car, and drove home with the dawn in my face. I never took the night shift there again. They asked me, but I always found a reason to say no. I still think about that dragging sound, how it felt like it was moving something it didn't want me to see, or maybe moving to come up those stairs, and I just barely walked away in time. I never believed in ghosts before that, and I'm not sure I do now. But I believe in that feeling, the one that tells you to run before you even know why.